Okay guys, another rather quick one. This one is not live. It's in retrospect, I diagnosed the Mercedes 2006 Mercedes ML320 CDI. Means it has a common rail V6 engine. At the time, I didn't have a lot of time, so I didn't record it. But I didn't record it live. But I recorded some of the of my findings. And this vehicle was brought to me with the customer had so many complaints, from engine performance to SRS. There were issues with the wipers. There were all sorts of electric gremlins in the vehicle. So anyway, here goes. First of all, I did some diagnostics, but I stored the fault codes. You won't believe it, I had up to about 90. At the beginning, I had about 92 fault codes in all the modules, because I did a roll call of all the modules on the vehicle. That vehicle has, what was it? Something in excess of 20 different modules. But as you can see, there are faults in the common rail diesel system, ESP, airbag, in the shift, ISM shift module, overhead control panel, front SAM, rear SAM, the front right door, that is the driver's door, Parktonic system. All these are different modules. And there was one in the CD changer. And then these are the actual fault codes. I concentrate on this video. I'm going to concentrate on the engine ones. You can see it had a multitude of those, and you can see it had fault codes for the intake air temperature sensor. It had fault codes for the mass airflow. By the way, on this engine, there are 2 mass airflow sensors and 2 intake air temperature sensor, and there is a charge air temperature sensor, and there was a code for that as well. I eventually found that open. There was one for the glow plugs on cylinder 1 and 4. You can see some of the fault codes are kind of repeated. There were CAN communication fault codes as well. Oh man, this had a multitude of fault codes. Anyway, for this short video, I'm going to concentrate on, you can see all the other fault codes, but for this video, I'm going to concentrate on the ones on what I found with the engine faults. There were no faults in the transmission, but the vehicle was kind of shifting funny, a bit harsh, and we resolved that by topping up the transmission fluid. But going back to the engine control module, I'm going to step out I'm going to get into the data I recorded. Things were looking funny. For example, I will show you one of the things that I found. Eventually, what I found was the engine computer, the engine control module, had shorts internally. There were so many, several signal wires were shorted internally. And what led me to that, the engine actually ran, the vehicle ran quite well actually, responded very well. But have a look at this. Let me graph the engine speed and the air mass And I think I also need to, let me go back to where I began, because this was the final recorded file, but the first one was, I think, this one, where I was trying to compare engine speed with rail pressure. So let me graph those two. Come on. And let's go to the beginning. This is the end. Let's go to the beginning. You can see the engine speed is 0. As in, the key is in the on position. I haven't cranked the engine yet, but it is already telling me it has rail pressure of 330 bar. Now, that doesn't make sense, because I know common rail diesel engines, once the engine stops, the computer via the pressure regulating solenoid on the common rail releases all the fuel back into the tank. So until you start cranking, there shouldn't be pressure in the rail. This immediately caught my attention, and I cranked the vehicle. Let's move through the frames. That is just the beginning of the coding. You can see the RPM is still the same, but the RPM has gone up, but the rail pressure didn't even budge a little bit. Rail pressure is, fuel rail pressure is in green, the blue is the RPM, engine RPM. That is me cranking it, and then the RPM, the engine speed stabilize, and all the while the rail pressure didn't even flinch. And then I started, I think I put it into gear at that point. Still the rail pressure doesn't even budge, and I started driving off, and you can see the rail pressure is continuous through all this. I think that is another gear shift. I think it is shifting into probably gear 2, probably another gear shift there. And all the while the rail pressure is at 330. Let's continue. I think at some point I revved the engine hard enough to get the rail pressure signal to flinch a bit. I don't remember, but still all we are seeing right now is not good. That informed me that signal, the rail pressure signal, was shorted to something. You see, when I rev the engine beyond a certain RPM, that is like beyond 1200, that's when the rail pressure flinched, and they seem to follow each other like they should. And at this point, I'm convinced that the rail pressure signal I'm seeing is not from the rail pressure sensor. It is coming from somewhere else. At that point, I suspected it could be from the throttle position sensor. It could be from the charge pressure sensor, that is the equivalent of the map on the diesel, reading the charge pressure in the manifold, air charge pressure in the manifold, or it could be from the accelerator pedal position sensor. Remember, this is a 2006 Mercedes, so it certainly had drive-by-wire, and that all looks normal. And until you switch the engine off, and you still have 330 bar of fuel pressure. Now, I couldn't believe that was right, and then I went to, this is a final check, because I was trying to compare I tried to compare the rail pressure information with the mass airflow, because the mass airflow was reading negative values, by the way. Can you see that? I'd never seen a mass airflow reading negative numbers. And this is the boost pressure from the map sensor equivalent. Let's graph those. Before I crank the engine, the RPM is still in blue, air mass is in green, and a boost pressure is in red. So all that looked a bit normal. The only thing that doesn't look normal is the air mass, because it is negative. As you can see, it's green. The moment you crank the engine, you see the RPM is increasing from 0 there, and then the mass airflow reading is already at negative, no, it is at roughly 0, and then the moment I crank the engine, it goes to negative numbers. Now, that absolutely doesn't make sense. You can see the numbers are negative there. Right there, I knew I was looking at junk. The mass airflow signal was junk. The rail pressure signal was junk. The only thing I could believe was the boost pressure, which you will see made sense when I rev the engine up. Let me move to the beginning here. And what was, every time you increase the RPM, the rail pressure should increase, but do you now notice it is a mirror of the engine RPM? As in, it is increasing but in a negative format. That was really horrible. That was junk. The red trace is the boost pressure, which made sense. High RPMs mean the turbo charges harder, and the boost pressure increases. Yeah, so as you can see, in the end, I ended up, there are other things I found. For example, the engine coolant pump was running all the time with the key on. The fuel pump, it has two fuel pumps, one on the mechanical one on the engine, that is the high pressure pump, and the low pressure pump, which is in the fuel tank, just like for gasoline engines. That one was running all the time with the key on. So basically all this didn't make sense, and in the end, when I traced the fault, I realized the mass airflow signal was shorted to the fuel rail. Well, the mass airflow signal wire was shorted to the both mass airflow signals, because it has two wires, were shorted somehow to the fuel rail pressure sensor signal, and there was something also going amok with the both intake air temperature sensors. Oh man, this was really wacky. It was a nutcase. So when I disconnected the engine control module from the harness, from the wiring coming to the sensors, the shorts I was seeing in the signal wires disappeared. So I knew the fault was inside the engine control module, and that was my diagnosis. Bad engine control module. There were a few sensors which I could prove were bad, like the charge temperature sensor. We changed that and the fault code for that went, but the mass airflow, I decided to inform the customer that I'm not sure whether the mass airflow sensors and the intake air temperature sensors on the vehicle are good. The best thing would be to first change the engine control module with a good one, and then troubleshoot the mass airflow accordingly. You may find the mass airflow sensors are still good, the intake air temperature sensors are still good, and even the fuel air pressure sensor. And in fact, he told me the previous garage had changed all those sensors at his expense, and the fault was still there. The interesting thing though is that after all this diagnosis, restoring wiper operation and all those things, he took the vehicle back to the garage that he took it to previously, that made him change all those parts. And they said, yes, the computer is dead now, but it must have died when I had the vehicle in the garage. As in, I must know something about the death of the computer. So business can be like that. You try to be honest, you try to do a good job, then the customer goes back to the garage that misdiagnosed the vehicle in the first place, and they tell him, they actually seem to have convinced him, because he called me matter of factually, informing me of the updating me and telling me, asking me how come the computer, his engine computer, had decided to get all these faults in our workshop. So that's that, but I wanted to share my findings with you. Thank you for sitting or watching through this. See you when I get another interesting one.